Volunteers coming up in your container plants can be a good thing and a not so good thing. Today we're going to talk about what is a volunteer, what's it doing in your plants, and we're going to do some potting up. So stay tuned. When I pulled it up, you could see all the roots underneath. And I thought, gosh, that's heavy, but it was attached to the roots. It's not too bad. But this celery has to come out of this succulent planter. Okay, let's see if we can get this upstairs. Okay. Okay. I have a little bit of advice. When you get a pot that is heavy and you get it loaded down with plants, it's harder to move. And if you want to pick it up and move it somewhere, like I just did, all the way up the stairs and into here, this is a slippery surface. It's a glazed coating. It's harder to hang on to. And it's rounded, so it's harder to hang on to. And it's heavy, so it's harder to hang on to. So think of that when selecting your pots. I have been asked, what is a volunteer? Well, a volunteer plant, and I have had so many, is one that comes up on its own without you having to plant a seed or divide a plant. It just appears. And it's a blessing, usually. And what you will see is you have a pot, you have your little plant that you planted in it, and suddenly you have other plants coming up in the soil. Now, this happens very often in compost because lots of vegetables reseed in compost like that. If you're a beginning gardener and you don't recognize what the plant is that's coming up, and that happens to me as well, but I can deduce from what happened when, what the plant might be. In this case, this planter of succulent was sitting underneath celery that I was growing in the back of my Late Bloomer Garden 1.0. And I let it go to seed. Celery gets this high. And it drops lots of seeds, lots of little seeds. You can't see where they go. And some of them fell into this pot. I had forgotten about that. And when I brought this plant over, it had a few sprigs of this. And I thought, that looks like parsley. Young celery and young parsley look very similar. And so I tasted it, and of course, it's celery. You know immediately if you're tasting celery. I'm not recommending that you do that, especially if you're a beginner, because I don't want you tasting just anything. It might not be an edible plant. Luckily, today we have those plant apps. The app will identify the plant, and so you'll know what you're growing, and you'll know whether it's a weed and you want to get rid of it, or if you want to grow it out, put it in a different pot. Maybe it has room to grow in that pot. I think volunteers are fantastic. I think it was 2018. Every one of my tomato plants, 45 of them, were volunteers. From where we had put compost, all these sprouts came up. How easy, you know, because if you start tomatoes from seed, you start in January or February, and usually, unless you have a really cold, short season, you start in January or February inside, and you have your heat mats and your seeding trays, your grow light. I didn't do that year, and all of a sudden I've got 45 plants. And very often volunteers are plants that have acclimated to your environment and might do better than something you bring home from the nursery. Today we're going to get this celery out of this pot because there's no future for this celery in this pot, none whatsoever. And I'm not exactly sure how many celery plants there are. We'll find out when we take everything out of the pot. I've been talking about succulents in the last couple of videos, and one of the beautiful things about succulents is you don't have to root them. Okay, I got one celery out, and that taproot, in the center there's a hole, in this pot, and it was headed straight down, and that's what the roots were that I severed. These are actually 2 plants here. I'm going to separate them gently. Okay, you see, oops, I'm sorry, there's 3. I had a lot of volunteer celery also in 2018, and that all got planted out into cloth pots, and it was looking for moisture. So those roots were headed down to the ground. When seeds fall together side by side and you just see this coming up, you often think it's one plant, but you separate it and you see that there's a separate base to each of those plants. Every single one is going to have a taproot heading to that hole. Try to preserve as much as I can. Oh man, it's tough. Look at that. It's like a foot long. Okay, and I believe, let's see, I believe that's 1 plant. Yeah, that's 1 base. Okay. Once again, I'm using the white paper on my island cart to protect it. Now this is a tiny little one. I'm just going to pull it out with my fingers. It smells like celery in here. But even this tiny little one, look at that root. And will these all survive? I don't know. But since they're freebies and they wanted to live, I like to try to give volunteers, you know, volunteers that you can use, eat, or use, like flowers, herbs. I like to give them a chance. Whoa, that's gonna be a big problem. A lot of roots down there. I had to break something. Now you might say, why doesn't she just dump this whole thing out? Well, it's really heavy and the dirt's gonna go everywhere. If I was at Late Bloomer Garden 1.0, that's precisely what I would do. Okay, this obviously has to be completely repotted. No worries, it will be fine. I did it once before. But as you can see, these roots are spread all over this pot. And sometimes it's debatable whether to try to take plants out when the soil is dry or wet. In this case, I thought it might be easier to do it dry. Every situation is different. Every pot is different. Every root structure is different. That's what makes biology so fascinating. I'm just going to lift it out too. Now those, I forget the name of those, but they're very common here. I'm just trying to loosen everything because this is such a big one and the roots are everywhere. Let go, let go. We have 1. That's 1. That's like 2 feet. Okay, and then this one has a little baby on the side here. When the trowel went in, I heard a snap, and that was that one. So it had a big root going that way that I unfortunately cut. Okay, so first things first, I just want to get the succulents back situated in the planter, and then we'll move on to the celery very, very quickly. The whole hole is blocked with roots. Succulents have very shallow roots, not many of them. Trying to find the hole. You see this tiny little hole here? Okay, that's good enough. Okay, I'm going to show you how easy it is to pot these succulents because they're so forgiving. Now this whole island cart is shaking because this is a heavy pot. Okay, now that looks nice. This particular kind of succulent it gets the dead leaves, and you want to clean all of those off. Every so often, just you can literally go out to your garden and take a handful. Oops, I broke a good one. I broke two good ones. You know why? Because I've got on these big clunky gloves. This stem looks really kind of gnarly. You'd think, how can that beautiful rosette grow off of that shriveled up stem? We're just going to clean off the dead stuff and reset them back in the pot. Any one of these rosettes I could just stick in the ground and it would root itself and grow. But I just like to clean these up because it looks kind of messy if you don't. It has two little plants coming right there. All I'm going to do is just set these in here, kind of on the surface, push a little dirt around, and press it down. This bigger one, you can see the root system has these little nodules on the bottom that store moisture. This one has nothing because it all got torn off. This one has quite a bit of root structure, so I'm going to create a well. And here's where you want to be a little bit artistic. Say, how would this look nice in... Wait, hang on. I forgot to clean it up. Look, it's almost like an artichoke at the bottom. This one looks good, and you can see it has a little, unless that's broken. And this one is, the root structures are attached, so I'm going to try to clean it up without separating it. They're just so pretty. Look, I mean, they're just like flowers. This is just where your little bit of artistry comes in. You kind of have to look at the shape and you go, well, wait a minute, I could be wrong. Let's see. Yeah, I kind of think that would be best, although so it's just totally up to you, you know, whatever you think you like. The plant will adapt. Sometimes the roots just come up and they're exposed on the soil. It's no big deal. Or we could just let this all fill in. I think this could use some more soil. And you'll notice this soil has a lot more rock in it. That looks nice. These are shiny leaves, and so this little air bulb is much more effective than on the fuzzy leaves. Okay, I have some larger stones, but I'm not going to add any weight to this before I take it down. Okay, you're coming out. So my fan, Steve Mildengren, is a bodybuilder. Has taught bodybuilders, was a big bodybuilder in Sweden, and he recommended I get a belt to protect myself when I'm lifting anything heavy. I should have had this on before I brought that up, but at least now I have it on to take it back down. So what I have prepared are 3 1.7 gallon pots. Now I don't know why they make a 1.7 gallon pot and not a 2 gallon pot, but this is all I could find the day I went to the nursery. And let me just point out that people are reporting all over the country, seeds are hard to find, all kinds of nursery items are hard to find, plants. Obviously, people are starting to wake up and realize that we have to pay attention to where our food comes from, and if at all possible, grow our own. This is why I'm encouraging you not to just pull out those volunteers or ignore them, and actually use them for food. Now, if you don't wind up eating this celery, it will bolt like a carrot does, and it will be this high, and have beautiful umbel flowers. Umbel means like an umbrella, and that really attracts the beneficial insects. So if you don't eat it, don't worry, because it will be beneficial to your garden. Now what I decided is, you know, these roots are like, well, you can see this one is almost 2 feet long. So I'm not going to have a 2 feet deep pot. I do have a place in the front courtyard which has less hot sun, and celery is a cool season plant, so growing it in the heat of the summer, it might bolt anyway. But what I'm going to do is plant in these pots, because this is what I have, and I'm leaving the holes open. Normally I put nylon mesh under a pot to block the dirt from falling out these holes. And in this case, I'm leaving it open because remember how these roots went straight for that tiny little hole. And those roots will go out those. I'm going to set it right on the ground out there, and we're going to see what happens. So let's get these in these pots and get some dirt and get them out there and get them some water. Just want to let that taproot have plenty of space. You see, it's already starting to look like celery. And you'll have to watch my celery blanching video, because that's interesting. That's something you can do. You don't have to. I'm talking about keeping the stems white because they're less bitter to eat. Okay, that's one. Let's do the big one next. You see those roots? Let's move over. Okay. I talk to my plants all the time. Now what you can do is you can use a form or a band to hold these together, or you can just let them go open, and that's what I did before. This one's got the really big, thick root. Need more dirt. And even if you don't get big spears that you can dip into peanut butter or something, you can still cut this up and put it into soups, and it will give you that just as intense flavor as if they were big. Okay, that looks good. Let's get a little bit more dirt on this one. Okay, we're going to take those down in just a minute, but first I want to plant the little celeries in these 5 pots. And this is what I have. 2 little ones will go in the smaller cups, and then the other 3, this is actually a pretty big one to go into here, but these will just be for transporting. Get in there. Look at that thing. Get in there. This will just be for transporting 2 vanitas, and hopefully she'll have a kind of a shady spot to grow these out in the garden. Today I'm just using the soil straight out of the bag, and I'm adding my amendment to the top dress it. And I'm also working with dry soil today just to keep the mess down. But these celeries that have just been uprooted would be much happier if they were going into wet soil. But it will be wet very soon. Just imagine if all of these volunteer celery reached maturity, that would be 8 stalks of celery for free. Well, not exactly for free, because you've got potting soil and other stuff. Before we go down, I want to show you an entirely different situation. Here we have a beautiful succulent planter that has been invaded by these clover weeds. These are non-edible. They're taking over the pot. It was lovely before, so we are going to completely redo this, get all of this out, and put in some decorative rock. Now, if I had pulled out this clover before it had taken over, I wouldn't have to do this. So it's my own fault. But at this point, it's everywhere. So I think we have to just start over. The clover is taking a lot more moisture and not leaving moisture for the succulents. They don't need that much, but this is taking everything. And this will bloom and drop more seeds, and you have to control it unless you want it to take over in your garden or in your containers. Oh goodness, I think I just have to dump this whole thing out and start over. It's going to come out like a brownie, like a cupcake. Look at that. Completely root bound. Which is not a big deal if it's just the succulents, but okay. Let's see what we've got here. Ah, I had a big square piece. Okay. So that's just a piece of netting to keep the soil from falling through. The only one I'm worried about is this pearl necklace one, because it was so beautiful that you can see all of these red. You see this red? This goes all, it's going all the way around. I don't even know how best to do this, to tell you the truth. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to first take out these little flowers. This flower is suffering. Looks like it's not getting enough water. And I water this all the time. So it's because of this weed. Let's see. This one is looking really nice. Let's see if I can just loosen all this. The thing is, I don't know where the source of the pearl necklace one is. Ideally, you want that to drape over the pot and hang down like a necklace. Like I said, you don't have to be too careful with succulent roots because they will just take hold again. Ay, ay, ay. Okay. Here's our little flower. These clover roots are kind of pink. So, so that helps to identify. I'm just looking for pink because this pearl necklace has a green vine, or green strings I should call it. I have a feeling I'm gonna do some major damage to it, and I actually don't know if it will regrow. If it gets broken like that, I don't know if it's going to regrow. I don't know how to be gentle with this. But you see these beautiful pearl, it's like a pearl necklace. But the clover is very invasive. The little pearls have the water nodules also. What a mess. Okay, this pretty much looks like it's all the necklace plant. And you see it has these big like tubers that hold moisture. So I'm assuming that's the beginning of the little strings. I'm just going to kind of do my best to stick this back in and see if it roots. But That's pretty much all of the weed. Okay, here is our plant, the pieces that we're keeping. Okay, I'm just going to clean all this up, and then we're going to put this back in that. I cleaned all the dirt up and put most of it back in here. Some of it I discarded. Obviously, this is your centerpiece, and you've got to figure out how best to put that in first. I want to put this just off center. This has a nice root structure, so I'm going to put this right here. Any one of these leaves on a succulent, you can stick in the ground and they will grow a plant. Not always, I mean, sometimes they don't, but they're supposed to. Okay, I have 2 more little flowers and everything else are the pearls. So I'm going to put 1 flower here. Just kind of keep things symmetrical. I like symmetry. Now we've got to figure out our pearls. This is going to be interesting. When it's on a table, and this will be on a table outside, it will only be able to drape over one direction. If you put it on its own little plant stand, then you could drape it every direction all the way around it. I spent a little time trying to figure out this string of pearls. It grows like a vine, and ever so often it puts down a root. I guess you just plant it in a circle and then the little strings come off every so often. So I obviously cannot plant this entire batch. This I need to save for another planter. So I picked out about 5 choice strings, and I'm going to lay them around the perimeter and let the shoots coming off drape over. I'm hoping these roots head down and realize they need to go downward. Okay, so just as if there was a necklace around the neck of this planter, I am laying in these pearls. Most of them are going to get covered up because the roots are everywhere. And we shall see what seeks the light and what seeks the dark. This one is fuzzy, so it's harder to clean. But because I haven't used any water so far, it's looking pretty good. Now, I am doing my black decorative rock. This is a very cool little tool that came with my indoor gardening kit. This little rosette is practically buried. No matter what you're growing, mulch always helps to hold in the moisture and save water. But look how pretty. And maybe in 6 months there'll be these little strings will be draping all around the edge of the pot. Okay, we are going to take our plants downstairs. Okay, that's all for this segment. I'm gonna go have breakfast. Thanks so much for watching this channel, liking my videos, and especially sharing them with your friends. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Okay, start again. I haven't had any breakfast, you know, I'm very hungry. Could be a good thing. And then this is celery.
Oh, wow.
In these containers. They were all growing in this, and I took them out and I planted them. And there's 8 celeries growing in that pot. Some
Wow.
seeds had dropped in there.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
And I thought, well, they would never do anything in there, and so I repotted that. And these are celery.